Good afternoon, JawnCon. So, what everyone's interested in is what new regulatory bullshit do we have to deal with now? Or at least that's usually what I'm interested in, because that's, want to talk about making poor decisions in life? I went to law school. Yep. So, this talk, I want to talk about sort of what, and I hate this word, but drivers, like what's making us actually spend money on security? What's making us actually care about privacy? More than, the letter that we all write that says, at blank, we care about your privacy. Usually that then prefaces the how much we didn't care and why everything about you has been leaked and it's on Pastebin now. So who am I? Clearly a poor choice and poor sartorial choices. I'm a lawyer. I'm a cybersecurity consultant by trade. I'm not your lawyer or your cybersecurity consultant yet, but I like money. So if you have problems you can't solve and some money, I will take both. And I'm trying to prevent what I call HIPAA disease, because there's nothing like getting some crusty old sysadmin explaining HIPAA requires this, and you're like, HIPAA does not require that. HIPAA requires quantum cryptography. No. Or my favorite is, HIPAA requires encryption in transit. I'm like, that is a lie. How do I know that? Every healthcare provider in the United States has a large device that ships your PHI in an unencrypted format. It's the fax machine, because for some reason we still rely on those. So I'm just trying to debunk some myths. Yeah. Why this talk? Still lots of confusion, and regulators are now starting to pay more attention to security. We're seeing regulators that previously have not ever done so are now actually leaning in. So I'll start with healthcare, because that, that is one of the largest industries that consumes cybersecurity people, and consume is the operative word there. So what's new this year? Thankfully not much. No big updates to the OCR guidelines. Nothing really out there. In fact, I'm almost disappointed about this. Health and Human Services has not actually promulgated any rules about the use of AI. They have Health and Human Services has like an AI director, an AI ombudsman since like 2017. And there's no guidance about like, hey, I would like to use AI in my healthcare practice or in my healthcare startup. Nope, just figure it out. So, security rule. You should have some security. That's basically it. It's the amount of security you need to have and the level, what controls are up to you. As long as it is, dealing with the appropriate risk, your organization's capabilities, and the cost. So you can decide not, on some controls, you're allowed to say, I didn't put that in because it was just too damn hard. It's basically reasonable. Whatever a reasonable person would do is what you should be doing. And I realize that word is bearing a lot of weight. And primarily, this is usually how I catch out people when I'm dealing with HIPAA is, when people say this is a HIPAA requirement, and my job is to actually sometimes say, no, it isn't. Is it required or is it addressable? And addressable is a long-winded way of saying, we think you should do it, but if you don't, you better have a good reason. Like a good documented reason of why you're not doing the thing. So, technical safeguards. This is the technical requirements. You can see them in HIPAA. I'm not going to read them out to you because it's fairly voluminous, but basically you need to be able to have controls on access. You need to be able to audit those. You need controls on integrity, the ability to make sure that that healthcare data or EPHI has not been modified. However you want to, it's relevant to you and how you do it. So there isn't like a proscriptive rule. This is not NIST 800-171. This is not PCI. This is, choose your own adventure. And transmission security. Those are the 4 actual requirements, and how you implement them is generally up to you. So, examples. Required, you need to have unique users for, no problem. You need to have unique users to access protected healthcare information. So that way, if an admin, if the admin account or the root account can view it and multiple people have access, that makes the OCR people have a SAD, because that means you can have access to sensitive data and you can't point at who leaked it. You can't point at who misused it. It was the service account did that. And like, well, God knows every Windows shop I've ever worked in, when you go like, how many people have domain admin? They're like half. Like, that's smart. And then the other people that don't just have, there's a domain admin service user that everyone has the password to. It's like, that's wonderful. So that's what they're concerned about. They're concerned both about it leaking, but also just unauthorized people looking at that stuff. Because it seems to be every healthcare provider I've worked for, that's like a common hobby, is let's go look at someone's rash. Like how many people have accessed this healthcare record for no good reason? And then the addressable ones. And the addressable controls are, you should do this, but if you don't, document why. You made a risk assessment and you said it's too hard, it's too expensive, that control doesn't actually get us anywhere, and you can hand wave it away. So what's the stick that the regulators have to make you comply with HIPAA? Well, there are fines. And usually, every bad salesperson is pointing at this number, $2 million penalty if you don't comply. And admittedly, like $2 million is real money. And every sales rep selling a Blinky box or, some next-gen service. Hopefully there aren't any dark trace reps in here because, well, no, I know there aren't any dark trace reps here because they'd be humping my leg. Yeah, someone's done that. You're at RSA or someplace and you make the mistake of making eye contact with the dark trace rep, and they travel without moving, and it's like, hey, would you be interested? And you're like, dear God, no, go away. Sorry. So, however, though, the big scary number's there, but for that is a willful neglect. That is, you were being schmucks. I've never seen a fine like that for mere dumb, like we didn't patch, or we put something on the internet, directly on the internet that shouldn't have been. That is for, you had a contest about, who had the biggest pimple, and you had people going through healthcare records to find things. Or my favorite for a fine was Yelp reviews. And I get that the only people that use Yelp are people who are angry at bad service they got. That's all it seems to be, is complaining about service. Someone complains about the service they had at a dentist's office. And if you think about, you're running a business and you want to have happy customers, the ideal thing is to go talk to that one person and go, hey, I'm sorry you had a bad experience. Can I do something to make it better? Can I comp you something? Can I, do some service for you for free? what. Instead, the dental service in question goes through and pulls their healthcare records and responds in Yelp about the problems that person had. So it's like, that's the worst thing. It's like your healthcare provider will dump shit about you on Yelp to counter your bad review. Like, OCR was like, that is some bullshit, really. Like, you really should not have done that thing. But these are the sticks that, you know, if I'm as a consultant, I'm saying to you like, hey, you need to be HIPAA compliant. That's the stick, if I'm really feeling greasy, will use to justify you spending some real money. Other bit about HIPAA is, you know, fines are higher for egregious conduct, but no one's going to get sued by a third party or by a patient. This is the sad part about HIPAA, is your healthcare provider does something ugly and stupid with your healthcare data, or like one of my clients did, put several hundred healthcare records in an open blob because access controls are hard. Those people cannot sue under HIPAA to get, you know, to get damages. Only Health and Human Services and state attorneys general can go after, you know, a bad healthcare provider or a bad insurer for this. However, in some states that have where there is a right of privacy, you can say like, look, you violated HIPAA, that's the standard, and you screwed over, you know, you damaged my, you know, my right to privacy, and therefore please compensate me for posting pictures of that awful rash I had, or that positive STI, you know, finding. But there aren't many suits about this, because usually people aren't all that happy about. It's hard to come up with the damages. Like, how much did you actually suffer from your healthcare provider dump stuff out about you? So this is not a burgeoning kind of litigation. No one's calling you up to say, hey, do you want to go sue your dentist? So this is the one that I'm sure everyone got interested in, because all of a sudden the SEC is saying, hey, if you have a material breach, and an investor may make it may enter into the calculus they make about making an investment decision or a board vote, you have to put it in, you have to disclose it to the public. And as my friend Kelly was pointing out earlier, it's great to see the tea spilled in all these new reports, where it's like MGM dumping data, like, hey, yeah, that cost us $100 million for that little brouhaha, right? So now we get to, like, because that was always the fun part, was like, someone suffers a breach, and you're like, I want details. And you know some of the IR people, and they're like, I can't talk about it. And you're like, I know what that means. That means at the Circle Bar at DEF CON, 3 drinks in, you are going to say everything about that on the back, and it's going to be and of course, like, that's why, God, that's why I go to the Circle Bar and pour drinks down someone's throat. Like, I really want to find the details on this breach, and and I remember bad story time. I used to work with a guy who worked for Department of Homeland Security, not at CISA, but like the regular, we make TSA work. And I'm like, how? Really? Okay. But he was like I'm all about the mission and I support the mission. Like, that's why you quit and you're working for the consulting firm that I'm working for. But fine, you did great work. And he's like, yeah, no one ever talks about that. I'm like, bullshit. Like, I'll discuss that in a skiff. And I'm like, is there a skiff that serves drinks? Right? Go to a con, go to the bar, and find the person who's done IR. I'm like, did you do the IR that I was interested in? Or did you, the other half of that story? Put a couple drinks down. I'm like, yeah, great. I got good details. I don't really care about the company. I care about, I want the little tidbits about what did the attacker do. mostly to see, like, is that the attacker that hit my client? What's similar? But anyway, Form 8K, within 4 days of determination of materiality. That's not 4 days of the breach. That's 4 days after you realize the breach is big enough that you think investors would go, I ain't sure about investing. I think I'm going to sell. And given, let's see, who am I thinking of who did this last? Equifax, right? Really, the ideal thing would be is watch the insiders' trades, right? Because, like, if the breach is big enough to have insiders sell stock, that's probably material. There aren't a lot of, because, like, the problem is I've been reading SEC documents on materiality, and they're like, it's not mechanical. It should be taken as a whole. And I'm like, that feels so much like, I'm going to make this bad joke, but when my wife says, fine, go ahead and do that, right? That's clearly, a clear definition, like, I'm in trouble. I just don't know how much trouble I'm in. So that's the definition, according to the SEC, is a substantial likelihood that a reasonable investor would consider it making a decision. It doesn't necessarily have to change their decision. It's just that would be nice to know, right? So does the breach cost enough? And the problem is that I don't know what a breach really costs. Right? Like, there's the Ponemon Institute, which I realize is we pulled it out of our Ponemon to come up with the numbers. But, like, what's the real cost of a breach? How many customers do you actually lose during a breach? And I think, I'm going to say, I don't think you do. My argument is always, when you get some sales rep who's like, look, a breach could end your company. I'm like, name a company that's actually gone out of business after a breach, right? And like, well, there are horrible breaches, like Target is still in business. Sony is still in business, for Christ's sake. Ashley Madison is still in business, right? A breach that was like, was fodder for fun for 6 months. And not only out of that breach did they realize, like, there are no women on Ashley Madison. They're all bots. Like, have both your clients doing embarrassing things, that gets popped, and that your company is a fraud and you still don't go out of business. I'm convinced, like, yeah, really, a breach is merely an annoyance. That's really not a sales pitch, though, I think, to get my services, right? Yeah, you might get breached, who cares? But SEC is going to be saying, essentially, if the breach is big enough that investors will care, we care. So disclose it. And it's 4 days from when you figure that out. So the SEC safeguards rule, this is a new one. This actually requires you to do something, even without a breach, right? In your reports, you have to describe what you're doing about risk management, about cyber risk management. You have to describe things like, how does the board oversee it? What experience does the board have about the cybers? Are you doing third-party risk management? Are you hiring third parties to do your risk management, right? Do you have outside consultants? Do you have an audit firm that's going and poking at your stuff? And it doesn't actually set any minimum standards, but it basically says you have to show your work. And God knows every business person's like, when you get asked that question of, yeah, we've got security, describe it. Uh-oh. Like, and not only describe it in a document that goes to the SEC and your investors. All of a sudden, you're like, wait a minute, I have to sign that document. That's a scary document now. I can no longer hand wave we have a best of breed security program that is aligned with ISO 27001. Do you have an ISO cert? No, we're aligned with. Like, okay, yep. My car broken down on the side of the road is aligned with cars that are actually getting where they're going. So it's setting the bar pretty low, but that the SEC has taken the bar off the ground is interesting, because this is broad. This is not specific industry, right? Like HIPAA, healthcare, GLBA, banking, TSA has some rules on pipelines and transit, but to set, like, if you sell shares, you have to describe what you're doing about cyber risk. You have to describe what those breaches look like if they're big enough. So it's kind of putting us all on notice. So the SEC penalties, yes, they can fine you. If you look at SEC fines for other things, they're pretty much speeding tickets, right? We did a fraud for $1 billion. Well, we're going to fine you 30 million. And I'm like, okay. Is that tax deductible? Do I get points? Like, do I get miles on that? No? But the scarier thing is the derivative shareholder lawsuit. This is a mouthful. This is, I'm an investor, and because you, chuckle fucks, screwed up the company I invested in, I'm suing the company for loss of share price. And I've worked on some of these as you know, not like in running them, more like the grunt who goes through all the emails, and I read your emails, and God, people are boring. But basically a lawsuit saying, because your security was shitty, we had a breach. Because you were in the board, you were managing that dumpster fire and the stock price went down. I'm suing you because you misled me. You know? You lied to me, and now I'm going to go broke. You know, I bought Tesla stock at the peak. Actually, that's different. That's, you know, because you can't really sue someone for like, I thought Elon Musk was well-regulated and, you know, generally even-tempered. Like, really? Dude, you knew I was a scorpion. GDPR. I love the Europeans. Not so much in a cynical way. Like, I actually love that there's a group of people who actually believe there is privacy. And they're trying so hard. And why I love the GDPR is it's not industry-based. It's not like, oh, well, we're not in healthcare, so we don't have to do it. Like, no, if you handle sensitive data of other people, you have some, you're bound to it. You have to play nice. It's still not, you know, it's a risk-cost-based approach, which is reasonable if you're an English speaker, but because they're not, they have a much wordier definition. But it's essentially calculate the costs, calculate the risk to your users, calculate, you know, how much effort it's going to be, and if the cost is lower than the risk, you should probably put that control in place. Nice. And what's new? There are two ones that I think are interesting. One is there's procedural regulation. They're essentially trying to standardize GDPR enforcement across all the EU. So now, sadly, I think this might make Max Schrems unhappy. He's the guy who keeps suing Facebook and keeps smashing, you know, whatever safe harbor they have, because that's that. You know, what a wonderful like way we do this is the Europeans are like, you can't use any data you get just because you want to, and we as Americans go, that's half of Silicon Valley, right? Like, we have a product. What's that product? It's your data. That's all it is. And the Europeans like, no, you have to have a real product. But because, you know, we built the internet and stuff, the Europeans aren't going to go like, no, you're, you know, persona non grata. So they keep coming up with the, if you agree to follow the rules, we'll let you play. I think it's silly, but anyway. The The second one, the CNIL, and I can't pronounce it because I don't speak French, they're the French data regulator. And they, and this is what bugs me, is they have put out an opinion about the use of AI for handling, for processing protected information. And they actually have guidance that makes sense, and they have it open for an RFP. So if you want to make comments, if you work in AI or work in security and privacy, you can like make comments, you can propose stuff. Theirs was like they set a baseline, which is AI can be compatible with the GDPR. We don't know what it exactly looks like yet, but we can. And I love that, like, the regulators are looking forward. They're actually paying attention, as opposed to the United States, where pretty much like they will ignore it as long as possible until they're absolutely forced to. And looking forward, and if you're working with GDPR if you're doing business in the EU, either as an EU company or as an American company going and doing business in the EU, you're now regulated. You have to, if you collect personal information, has to be limited to the reason why you told the user. I am going to read your email because I'm going to put your email on the dashboard of your car. That was actually a gig I did. We did security for a large European car manufacturer that wanted it so you could read your Outlook email and view Excel, PowerPoint, and Word documents on your dashboard. Look, I don't kink shame or nothing, but right, like, so the car gets to read your email. However, it's limited to, why am I reading your email? To display it, right? I'm going to pipe it through my text-to-speech engine. So and the privacy, like reading the privacy thing for this manufacturer was like, that's really well written out. You're not going to use this for all the bullshit that an American company would, right? I'm going to grep the shit out of your email and come up with things you're going to buy and display it on your car while you're driving, Instead, it's like, no, we built it for this. We're only going to use it for that. And their bit was, right, purpose limitation as a part of GDPR gets a little fuzzy when we're talking about AI because you're teaching and, that model is learning and you may decide to do something else with that model. Right? You may pivot. And the CNIL said, like, look, we recognize that's going to happen. We think it's possible. We're not going to immediately ban it. Minimization. You should just avoid unnecessary PII. Instead of like banning it, they're like, no, like restrict the amount of PII you shove in your LLM, which seems like a good idea anyway. And there are enough little startups who are doing like data scrubbing, so that way you turn PHI or PII into just an identifier, so that way you can do processing on it without, like, hey, look at this rash on this guy, without it mapping back to me. So data retention, we recognize that normally you would hold stuff for as long as you need for that transaction. Here we realize you've stuck it in an LLM. It's gone forever. I do notice, though, that if you think of what the GDPR with its right to be forgotten rule, the CNIL is silent on that, because doing some AI work, I realized like the idea of like, remove my information from your LLM is like, I want to reassemble this cow from that hamburger. Like, nope, I don't know where to go, everywhere. Your data has propagated through and I don't know what's you and what ain't. Kind of the way like, Facebook operates, which is like, we can't do right to forget because your data just goes in the puddle. It's the data lake problem. And data reuse, this is cool. as long as your data was legally collected at the beginning, they can reuse it and modify its use as long as it's compatible. So the French are going like really out on this and going like, we're not going to immediately crush you, which I'm surprised. So why do we care about the GDPR? And they've got the biggest stick out there, right? The 4% or 20 million euro if you violate the GDPR. And most of these fines are for misuse of data. The fines for bad security are much smaller because they've generally taken the regulators have taken the approach that if your security was inadequate but you still did something, we don't want to penalize you. We don't want to penalize you for getting your bicycle stolen if you locked it with a shitty lock. If you didn't lock it at all, maybe we're a little annoyed. If you deliberately misused it, we're very annoyed. And new modification under GDPR, I can't because I'm not European, but a European can sue you if you leak their data in violation of the GDPR. So they have a really effective like two-prong attack. So if a regulator still thinks like, I'm busy, I'm not going to go after you, an individual harmed can go after you. So a much tighter regulatory schema there than ours. And that's it. So, any questions about my meandering path?
Do you have any examples of enforcement on any of these from SEC or European regulators?
Yeah, let's see. SEC, I haven't seen any on because all the new ones, the new breach rule is fairly young. Everyone who's been breached has been like, yeah, we should put that out there. I've seen for withholding information about other financial stuff, and I imagine that will be viewed the same way when it comes to, we had a shortfall and we're going to hide that. SEC has been able to regulate and fine, not so much that it makes it completely unprofitable, but it stings. For GDPR, I've seen one. I believe it was a French hotel chain, and I'm bad because I pay less attention to the GDPR than I do the American rules because most of my clients are American. But I think it was a hotel chain that basically got popped, and they were able to, the fine was fairly minimal, but it was still, it's an embarrassment. And I imagine under French regulatory law, they would then have to also put that in their corporate reports to their investors with, oh, by the way, we also had to pay an extra tax. Well, Marriott, which one? Marriott gets popped up like every 18 months, it seems. I mean, they were the guys that they earned it. Remember, one of the first hotels that deliberately did Wi-Fi jammers to force you not to use a hotspot, but instead use their $20 a day Wi-Fi. That was, that infuriated me, was, because I'm in a Marriott hotel going, why is my hotspot not working? And I'm like, tweeting bullshit to Verizon, like, your hotspot sucks. And I would have loved it like, at Marriott, please let Alex surf the web. Anything else? Yeah. The SEC breach rule does. The SEC can also regulate just sales of securities, but the breach rule is for publicly traded. For now, we may see that change.
So specifically, if you're talking about something like HIPAA, and a lot of those organizations are not-for-profit. So is there a different set of rules for either, various, not just healthcare, some financial institutions?
Not-for-profit wouldn't change I mean, a not-for-profit organization is probably not regulated by the SEC. Yeah, but HIPAA would still, yeah. Yeah, HIPAA is going to hit you if you're not-for-profit, for-profit, state-owned even. Yeah, there's no charity exclusion there. Do you have? Yep. It was initially said as, yeah, sorry. You're talking about the penalty cap for a tier 4, the willful, like, what I think is like serious bullshit, but it's willful and unfixed within 30 days was set at $2 million a few years ago. But it's on a cost of living. So the inflation rate modifies it automatically, so it's now at 2.3. I'm going to give the lawyer's answer, which is it depends. Because in some cases, the OCR, the regulator, has said, like, we have multiple instances of this problem, and they're usually looking over time. So it's like this is a problem that's been festering for a while versus a single breach that goes across the board. So, like, we lost 10,000 records. That's one event. But every day someone logs in and views PHI they shouldn't. That might be multiple events. So the 2.3, it's also an annual cap. I don't know, because I'm trying to think if there have been any that have hit that full cap. Like even the Anthem breach, I don't think hit that, and that was like the most records, at least that year. Anything else? Cool. Thank you so much.